and I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Gracias, Mr. President. Some member states of the Security Council continue to seek to use this platform as a tool for their foreign policy and for the defamation and pitting against the government of my country, under the pretext of pretentious scare and lethal affection. These have been manifested in the large number of formal or informal, small or expanded, rhetorical or consultative meetings on the situation in my country, in both political, humanitarian, and why not some chemical aspects. A few days ago, on a French initiative, the permanent representatives of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council met with the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs to discuss minor aspects related to the humanitarian situation in my country. Today, like previous times, the Council is holding 2 meetings on Syria on the same day. Naturally, we would not have had any objection to that if we had seen a reasonable degree of professionalism, objectivity, and humanitarian concern in OCHA's reports and briefings, and in the positions of the 3 permanent Western states of this Council and their allies. Mr. President, recently at the United Nations and beyond, we have witnessed a positive movement on the one hand, and a feverish rush and competition on the other hand, to formulate a coordinated collective response to the threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The efforts exerted by the international community to address this pandemic have encountered the same dilemma as the work of the United Nations in the field of humanitarian response in my country and other states, namely politicization and the pursuit of political views and orientations by some at the expense of the principles of international law and humanity. Whereas the Secretary General of the United Nations and senior staff of the organization, including the Special Envoy to my country, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, WHO, and more than 40 United Nations and international organizations have launched calls for the lifting of unilateral coercive measures against the approximately 2 billion people of the countries affected by these illegitimate and illegal measures to enable them to respond to and treat the COVID-19 pandemic. The United States and its European Union allies have sought to empty any proposals, initiatives, or the 9 relevant draft resolutions, so far 9, from any language that demands existing imbalances to be corrected and unilateral coercive measures eliminated in a selfish exclusionary conduct that denies any humanitarian concern claimed by their respective governments. My country, Syria, in cooperation with friendly countries affected by unilateral coercive measures, has sent numerous letters and appeals to the Secretary General of the United Nations, the Presidents of the Security Council, the President of the General Assembly, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to demand the lifting of these inhuman measures, which constitute economic terrorism and a stain on those who impose them. Moreover, our demands have been accompanied by petitions signed by millions around the world to reject these measures. To date, we have not seen any sincere response from the governments that impose these measures. And the American administration has only issued what it called a fact sheet, which is merely allegations that have nothing to do with any truth and are aimed only at covering up the flagrant violations of international law, the Charter of the United Nations and the human rights instruments. What humanitarian situation are we talking about today? Isn't it a humanitarian matter to put an end to the suffering of 2 billion people from the coercive measures? Is lifting the coercive measures imposed against 24 million Syrians less important than Ali Arubiya border crossing that was made a vital issue by some members of this council and hostile Ghazi Intab OCHA office? Why did France or Germany or Belgium not take the initiative to call for a Security Council meeting to discuss the impacts of coercive measures on Syrians? Why did they not request the Secretary General to issue an objective and professional report to the Security Council within 30 days on the impacts of the coercive measures on the Syrian state institutions and the daily life of Syrians? It seems that the humanitarian pen held by Germany and Belgium writes only what some of their NATO allies forced them to, and that the pen of OCHA, which wrote 66 reports and hundreds of briefings so far, does not dare to write what angers its operators. Mr. President, my delegation reiterates the demand to immediately and unconditionally put an end to the unilateral coercive measures that are used by some member states as a weapon in their sinful war against my country. These measures, among many others, deprive Syrians of their basic livelihood needs, as well as prevent the medical and healthcare institutions from obtaining testing, diagnosis, preventing, and treatment kits for this pandemic, ventilators, intensive care beds, ambulances, laboratories, and quarantine centers equipment, and personal protection equipment for healthcare workers. Add to all this not being able to obtain tumor medicines and medical devices such as MRIs, CT scans, radiography, ultrasound, endoscopy machines, monitors, and oxygen concentrators. Depriving the Syrian people and the state institutions of this essential equipment and the continuation of the financial, economic, and commercial embargo imposed on the Syrian state and freezing its foreign assets negate any humanitarian allegations claimed by some member states of the Council. In this context, I reiterate our gratitude to Russia and China for standing with Syria in these difficult times. Mr. President, a few days ago, my country sent you an official letter regarding its position on the 66 report of the United Nations Secretariat. My delegation stresses the ineffectiveness of these reports that do not dare to clearly and truly address the practices of countries sponsoring terrorism. These reports do not mention the Turkish occupation violations of international law and its numerous crimes against civilians. They say nothing about how the international coalition destroyed Al-Raqqa city, killed thousands of its people who were buried under rubble, and committed many war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Secretariat reports do not mention how the Turkish regime blackmails Europe using the suffering of refugees, nor do they say anything about the fact that the Turkish Red Crescent and the terrorist groups supported by it strive to prevent the Syrian Red Crescent from working in northwest Syria, while American occupation forces and their proxy terrorist militias prevent it from working in northeast Syria and deprive Syrians in government-controlled countryside of Al-Raqqa of electricity. Again, the Secretariat does not report about how the American occupation forces and its affiliated terrorist group, Maghawir al-Thawra, resist to end the suffering of displaced people in Al-Rukban camp and dismantle this infamous camp. These reports do not mention how the concerned European countries refuse to repatriate their nationals of foreign terrorists. These reports, Mr. President, say nothing about how the Turkish occupation forces destroyed the village of Al-Sharkarak after displacing its people, nor do they mention how the Turkish regime and the American occupation forces loot the wealth, resources, oil, and antiquities of the Syrian people. All 66 reports of OCHA are biased and lack credibility. They are flagrantly selective and over-politicized. They over-politicize the humanitarian situation, definitely. Therefore, they are worthless reports and a waste of time, effort, and resources of the United Nations. Finally, Mr. President, we are not only facing in Syria COVID-19, we are also facing a more dangerous virus, which is terrorism, that some countries insisted on ignoring for too long, and to maneuver the facts when it falsely called it moderate armed opposition groups or non-state armed elements. And this virus has many names, as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Hurras al-Din and Sultan Murad and Kataib al-Zunki and Maghawir al-Thawra and other several and many expressions and terminologies. This is the terrorist virus that my country has been confronted for 9 years. Gracias, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for his statement.